Welcome to Empowered. We're so glad that you're going to join us today for our discussion. I'm here with co-host Mabel Dunbar. I'm Ron Simpson. And we have an interesting topic that we are going to delve into today. I was watching, all these things come through Facebook and on the internet and on YouTube. And there was a video that showed up on there recently about how people react to and recognize abuse. And we're talking about domestic abuse, so between partners, and in this particular case. And in the video, it was interesting to watch how, and it was all staged, it was not actual abuse going on, but it was interesting to note how people reacted to the abuse of one individual towards the other. And what I'm saying is that when the man was abusive towards the women, you got a completely different response and reaction from the people that were watching than you did when the woman was abusive towards the man. And remember, these were paid actors that were doing this. As Mabel and I were talking about this, we got to discussing this whole idea about recognizing the characteristics of an abuser. Now, I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, it's pretty, based on what I just said, it's pretty clear that people's attitudes towards men being the initiator are pretty strongly approached, so to speak. So I guess the first question I want to ask you is, we have a tendency to look towards the male as the abuser. Is that normal? Is that fair? And is this more of a general identification process for people in general? So let's start there. How is it that, or how do we come to recognize men primarily as the abusers and then women, or is it fair to say that it goes both ways? Let's put it that way.
It's fair to say that it goes both ways. And one of the reasons why I believe, in my experience, we tend to call the perpetrator or the abuser male is because in most relationships, physical violence has been considered to be domestic violence. And therefore, if it's a physical altercation, normally it is the man who's beating up on the woman. And so because of the devastation, because of the serious nature of physical violence, and many years ago, as it has been addressed, it appeared always that it was the woman getting beat up, the woman with the black eye, the woman going to the hospital. And so throughout the years, it's always been considered that the male, in 95% of the cases, the male is considered to be the abuser and the aggressor. And statistically, that is so.
What's the first thing we're going to be looking for?
So when we talk about the characteristics, it doesn't mean that number one of what we talk about is going to be the first thing you look for. It can come in many different ways. In my experience, one of the things I tell women when I work with them to be careful about someone who, when you meet them, of course, we're talking about a man who's interested in her, be very careful about how quickly he wants to be involved with you. An abusive personality, one of the characteristics is that and we're going to call the abuser he, and we're going to call the victim she for clarity. But we have to understand that it could go either way. And also, we need to understand too, and one of the reasons we have this program, which is dealing a lot with the spirituality and the Christian aspect of abuse, is that we know we have an enemy, and Satan is behind all forms of abuse, seeking to have power and control over us. And so he shows his I don't know what you want to say, but he shows his anger towards us by projecting his desire to have power and control. So because he wants power and control over us, he tries to get us to have power and control over each other. And we all know that domestic violence is the characteristics of it, or the reason for it, is power and control issues. But anyway, let's get back to quick involvement. Normally, when an abusive person meets someone that they want to get involved with and somebody that they want to have power and control over, they quickly get that person enmeshed in their lives. They They want to date that person. They want to have sex real quick. They want to possess that person. They let that person feel that you're the only one for me. I have to have you. No one else can do it for me. You're the most wonderful person in my life, and I need you. And so a woman now who's been a victim, remember we're talking about victims and abusers. So a woman who has been a victim, she might feel that, you know, she's needed, she's wanted. This man really loves me, and he possesses her. He possesses her time. You know, he just wants to be with her all the time. He gives her all these gifts, and he comes on so strong, and she is the center of his world, and she gets sucked into it. And by the time she realizes that she's sucked into it, it's very difficult to break away. And so individuals might be looking at her and they might be seeing what's going on in this relationship, and they give her warning messages. But, you know, as far as she's concerned, but he loves me. Look at all that he's doing for me. He doesn't want anybody else to take up my time. And so she believes that it's because he really loves her. But the intent of that is that she gets so hooked up into him, and she is so in love with him and so enmeshed with him that no matter what people say, she is so much in his grasp, and she becomes so emotionally dependent on him that she'll get angry with those people who are telling her, you might need to take it easy.
Is it normal for an abuser to have maybe two kind of presentations personality-wise, one publicly, one privately?
Another characteristic is that they have this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of personality where, you know, she sees one thing initially, but then as the relationship deepens, she starts seeing this other person. And abusers have the ability that they can be very charming, they can be very loving, they can be very compassionate and kind to other people. But when they have this woman, victim, when she is in his grasp and she really starts seeing this other side, she is alarmed and she's frightened and she's scared, but she's too scared to get out of it. And as the relationship intensifies and as they get deeper into being in love, and even if they get married, the abuse can continue behind closed doors. But when this abuser is out in public, he could be a lawyer, he could be a doctor, he could be a teacher, he could be a pastor, he could be a church elder, he could be a deacon. Everybody else sees this person. Loving, kind, always to church, you know, out in society, the first one to give money to any kind of program or any charity. But the victim sees somebody else. And what happens now when she tries to talk and say, look, my husband's doing this, or this is what's happening to me in this relationship, she's not believed. And do you see how it's switching?
Yeah, exactly.
Initially, they're telling you to be careful, but then when you're not careful, or she's not careful, and then she enters into this relationship, and then people are looking and saying, oh, everything is wonderful, everything is fine, and she starts talking and saying, this is what's going on. Nobody believes her.
When you talk about people that say, I don't believe that, or sure, yeah, right, there may be no sign of physical trauma, of anything like that going on, but emotional trauma can be, emotional abuse can be horrible, horribly traumatic.
There are a lot of signs of emotional abuse, but one of them, and this is a terminology that a lot of people know, low self-esteem. People they don't feel good enough about themselves. They question their intelligence. They question everything about themselves. I've known of beautiful women who, you know, you look at them, they're well put together, they're just absolutely gorgeous, and they'll tell you, I'm ugly. A lot of messages that they have heard determine who they believe they are. And so a lot of negative messages that they have heard, they use those negative messages, and those negative messages become negative rules that they live by. So I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I'm ignorant, I won't amount to anything. Whatever people say about me is the truth. They don't challenge the truth about who they are. They don't challenge if somebody says something about me, is that really true about me, or am I going to take that on and take it as if that's how I have to live because of who you say I am. So there are a lot of things that contribute to emotional abuse. But I think for me, as I deal with individuals who are emotionally abused, the number one thing I see is they lack the confidence to even get the help that they need. You have to You have to help them to recognize you're valuable enough that you need to fight for who you are. You need to get help for who you are. And that's one of the things we do through our program.
So a characteristic of an abuser is to seek out those type of people. That's what you're saying.
Abusers are attracted to victims. And victims and abusers tend to be drawn to each other. And so that is the answer to your question. They tend to be drawn to each other.
I think it's important to say as well that abusers are people.
Yes,
and they need help.
Yes,
and they need prayer. I was thinking, though, as you were talking about this word isolation. And it's an interesting word because I have so many times in my life, I've watched scenarios play out where a man will hook up with a female, and slowly but surely she'll be drawn away from what she normally does, or what has been normal in the past. How can you expand on that idea to help us understand a little bit more about this isolation process? This is a characteristic of abusers. I guess really what we're trying to find out, what are they doing? What are they up to? Why are they doing this? What's behind all this?
Well, what's behind it? Let me answer that question first. What's behind it is that the abuser is seeking to get the victim away from anyone who could influence her not to continue the relationship with him. And some of the warning signs is that, I mentioned some before, is that he takes up a lot of her time, and then as the relationship intensifies, he dictates where she can go, what she can wear, who she can see. He'll call at her job to check up on her, to make sure that she's there. So these are ways in which he controls her, and also these are ways in which he isolates her. And sometimes when people get married, he takes her away from her family. They'll go live someplace that nobody knows them. These are ways in which the abuser makes sure that this victim is in his control. And so that's what it looks like. He prevents her from getting any close friends. He prevents her from even looking good. She could start out dressing up herself, looking beautiful. But then all of a sudden, you look at this person and you say, what happened? She's not dressing the same way. She doesn't look the same way. She's forced to do certain things that she's never done before. And these are all signs that she's being isolated.
It sounds to me like there's a process in place here, and it sounds a little manipulative to me. So is it fair to say that manipulation is playing into this process?
Well, guess what? The third characteristic I have on my list is manipulation and control. And what the abuser does, he really manipulates the environment. And he manipulates everyone around him and her. And like I mentioned before, then we start thinking something is wrong with her because her behavior has changed. His hasn't. Think about that.
Exactly.
His behavior hasn't changed. He's still the same warm, sweet, loving, kind, compassionate person. But she's changed. And so when he starts making little statements like, something's wrong with her, just look at her. She's crazy. She's not well. And so we start looking at the victim and saying something really is wrong with her. And she might be withdrawn. She's quiet. So many things change. And we look at her and say, whoa, how could he put up with that? Why does he stay in that relationship? But the question I always ask is, if he says so many negative things about her, if she's so horrible, if she's so crazy, why does he stay?
Exactly. We're looking at these characteristics. We're identifying the process with which somebody goes through to really gain control over somebody. Is it fair to throw this out there and say that there might be varying degrees? Some might be minor, some might be major. Do you have things from every end of the spectrum? Are some of those things maybe considered normal? Or are some of those things considered, to what degree they are they all unhealthy?
Well, there is such a thing that we call the domestic violence cycle. And I call it a relationship cycle. It's really a relationship cycle because in every relationship you have tension, And then you have explosion where people get angry with each other. And then you have a time when people make up and they keep on going in that cycle. We grow, we thrive, we learn. But in a domestic violence situation, it's where the abuser loses control and does something that can be permanently damaging to that victim. And so we all exhibit anger. We all have times that we lose control. So I would not necessarily say that the relationship is abnormal, but it becomes abnormal and becomes abusive when people do not know how to control their anger. They lash out at other people to the point that they can hurt others. And so that's when it becomes a violent relationship.
So an individual, an abuser in this case, might be somewhat controlling, but it might be mild. I guess that's the question I'm trying to find out, would that be considered?
Oh, yeah.
It would be.
Oh, yeah.
Because any time that you dictate, or as we say, control what another individual is doing, you're playing on unfair ground.
Yeah, and
that's fair to say.
And I think we all want control.
Oh, I think
so
too.
We all want control.
I think so too.
You know, we all want that. But another aspect of this whole situation is the control and the manipulation many times depends on the profession of the abuser.
Oh,
See,
wow.
A minister or pastor will control and manipulate differently to a doctor. A psychologist would control and manipulate different to, say, an engineer. You know, so now there are some things that's basic. The bottom line is they want to control this person. They might physically hit this person. But let me explain this to you. Maybe I could use this example. A religious person would use the Bible, text out of context, twist the scripture to manipulate a person or their victim. But a psychologist would say something like, you do not even have enough intelligence to have an opinion. A doctor might, if it comes to physical abuse, he might not hit the woman in her face. He might hit her on her trunk because the bruises will not be seen. So the abuse many times is dependent on who the abuser is.
From my vantage point, yeah, I agree that anybody can and is capable of that. But it wasn't that many years ago that I would have never thought that. I would have never imagined that. It's just in my walk of life and my profession, I've seen everything.
You see it.
And I start to understand a little bit more, from the victim's position that there's a problem. You've got somebody that's taking full advantage. And I think that's another way of saying it too, right?
Yeah.
They're taking advantage of another human being.
Yeah.
Let's look at that from a spiritual aspect, though. When you look at a person that has to learn how to recognize, there's hope for this individual, right?
There's hope for anyone.
And so we look at it from a spiritual perspective, and we say, what process needs to be put in place to help an individual? What can we do? Because learned behavior is tough. It's difficult.
But it can be unlearned.
That's the hard part.
It is. It's very difficult, and that's one of the reasons why we're having these programs. That's one of the reasons why we have the ministry that we do, Women's Healing and Empowerment Network. The first key is for people to be healed. And I love the text, Luke 4:18, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor, and then he has sent me to heal the brokenhearted. And the first step in helping people is for them to realize that the power, and this might sound like, what is it now? This might sound like 12-step program, which is it.
Yeah.
It is. The first part is to recognize that they are powerless, and then they need the power of Jesus Christ in them. They need to know that. But the first thing, when it comes to the spiritual aspect, which I struggle with all the time, people need to know that they need help.
Yes.
Because as Christians, some of us, we feel that as long as we're got God and God is with us, and, we'll just go and pray about it, and that is all wonderful. But we first of all need to recognize that we are broken. And when people recognize that they are broken and that they're in need of help and that they have a Savior and they have God who is there to help them, healing begins. And no matter how horrible that person is, no matter how abusive, no matter how victimized they have been, they can be healed.
That's amazing.
And that's why we're doing this.
From a spiritual perspective, it typically comes down to the same things no matter what the problem is. So if you're dealing with an
That's
abuser,
right.
or if you're
That's
dealing with an
right.
alcoholic, or if you're
That's
dealing
right.
with somebody that has something else in their life that is holding them back, it's that point with which you get to that says, look, I'm helpless. I need to recognize, and I need to pray. I need to put things in place in my life that are positive things to help me move forward. Well, we had an awesome discussion today. We hope that you were blessed by what we discussed, and you can gain something from this and apply it in your own life. We appreciate you watching us, and we look forward to working on and discussing more points in regards to abuse and victims, and how we can better understand people and how we can move forward in the healing process. And this is the show which we called Empowered.
We so much appreciate you viewing our program today. God has not given any of us the spirit of fear, but his spirit of love, power, and a sound mind. Therefore, we are pleased to provide this ministry to help you and others in your journey of healing from abuse. In order to continue doing this, we depend on financial support from viewers like you. Your donation is tax deductible and can be sent via a check or money order to our mailing address at Women's Healing and Empowerment Network, or WHE Network, P.O. Box 9637, Spokane, Washington 99209. You can also visit our website at whenetwork.com and click on the donation button. For your gift of $25 or more, we will send you a special token of our appreciation. Thank you for your prayers. May God continue to bless you and yours as you partner with us to help empower abused lives.